Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 31st, 2023. It is Halloween, and as you'll see later on in the discussion, we'll have a chance to take a look at a real witch, Hillary Clinton, reacting to an intervention by a young LaRouche organizer. But let me start by getting at this question of where we are in the world today. It's clear we're moving into a new era where the old imperial order is struggling to hold on, to maintain its control, not only over the poorer countries in the world, but over the populations in the Northern Hemisphere, in the United States and Europe. And they're using wars and disinformation to keep you accepting the idea that we have to fight these wars to defend, quote, our way of life, when in fact we're losing our way of life, if by that we mean the commitment to the traditions of the constitutional republic in the United States and the European cultural traditions that have defined civilization. First, you had the vote in the UN General Assembly last Friday. 120 nations voted for ceasefire. Only 14, ceasefire in Gaza, only 14 voted against it, led by the United States. You have the emergence of the BRICS, an alternative potential economic development system based on the idea of sovereign nations cooperating for mutual benefit. You had the Shanghai Belt and Road Initiative Forum in China, which had over 130 nations attending. The advance of the Belt and Road Initiative has brought hope to many countries in Asia and Africa, in South America, and the offer is still there for the West to join, a global infrastructure commitment to modernize and update the existing infrastructure. But what do we also have? We have two hot wars underway, and these wars are in reality not about freedom and democracy, not about fighting terrorism, but they're about a defense of the unipolar order of the rules-based order. In Ukraine, you have a situation where the Ukrainians are dying as proxies for an effort by the US and NATO to weaken Russia, as was said by Lloyd Austin. It was provoked by NATO. There's no question about it. Do the work, do the study on this. The fact is that the Russians repeatedly appealed to the West to form a new security alliance, and instead the West continued to push NATO forces closer and closer to Russia. In the meanwhile, hundreds of billions of dollars have gone to weapons that have either been delivered or pledged, or money that's just been laundered. They're the deaths of the Ukrainians, and U.S. officials brag that this is cheap, that the hundreds of billions we're spending on this war are cheap for the effect it's having on Russia, which, by the way, is not true. Russia is getting stronger and the West is getting weaker. There was a ceasefire initialed in March of 2022, which was sabotaged by the US and NATO, which meant more dead Ukrainians and Russians. And now the question is, will the West continue to support this war for as long as it takes, as Biden, as Schultz, and others have said? And how long will that be? Biden just asked for another $60 billion for the Ukraine war. Then Southwest Asia. There's no question that what Hamas did was barbaric and unacceptable. But does one evil justify another? The cycle of violence continues, and the victims increasingly are children. 40% of the dead so far in Gaza are children. And killing children for revenge only perpetuates the cycle of violence. Now compare the U.S. response, which is to stand by Israel, to provide more money and arms to Israel for this war, as well as Ukraine, with what China is doing. And this is not a defense of China. I'm just pointing out that there are two systems in opposition here. The Chinese have called for ceasefire and negotiations for both Ukraine and for Gaza. They have been involved in very interesting diplomatic activity. The rapprochement, for example, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two nations which had been at odds and in effect were fighting proxy wars in Yemen and in Syria. But that ended with the Chinese intervention, which includes the prospect of rebuilding the Middle East with the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is providing credit to nations for development, while the colonial West is offering only International Monetary Fund conditionalities and inefficient anti-growth green technology, which is increasingly being rejected by those countries. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. war hawks were facing diminished support for the Ukraine war, which became clear as polls show that most people think we've already done too much. And so what happens is now the Gaza conflict is being used to reverse that and control the agenda. All you have to do is look at the new U.S. Speaker of the House, Johnson, who gave a speech before the Republican Jewish Coalition on October 28th in Las Vegas. He said it's God's plan that we stand with Israel. He put a pro-Israel resolution through the House of Representatives, a separate bill for funding for Israel. Biden asked for $14.5 billion. It appears as though the Republicans are lining up to support that, even as they were balking on the continued funding for Ukraine. And Johnson denounced those calling for a ceasefire as anti-Semites, including thousands of Jews who are protesting in Israel and the United Kingdom and in the United States, demanding a ceasefire, and the Israeli papers that are calling for the removal of Netanyahu as prime minister. Is that anti-Semitism? So these two wars come from the same place, an imperial intent to protect the present unipolar order, or the so-called rules-based order, regardless of the cost. And what is that cost to you? It's not just the trillions of taxpayers' dollars that are going to the war machine, nor to the looting of the physical economy to bail out bankrupt corporate cartels. It's not only that. It's not only the restructuring of the world economy through the Great Reset and the Green New Deal, which could not have been pushed through because of opposition, except through introducing the chaos of global warfare. What's really the cost is the loss of the moral high ground, the loss of personal moral sense when one is too demoralized to act for the common good. And more importantly, perhaps, the loss of the intent of our founding fathers to establish a constitutional republic, which was enshrined in the preamble of our Constitution, which is not about a permanent war machine or a policeman of the world, but for the commitment to the general welfare of the American people, and by extension, how that is reflected by a policy which acts in coherence with the interests of the rest of the world. Lyndon LaRouche warned years ago that we will be tested, not on battlefields, but in the battle to defend the sacredness of human life, through the exercise of human creativity and our love of mankind. That was the point LaRouche made when he said that the challenge would be, do we have the moral fitness to survive? And he didn't mean to survive through military power or imperial domination, to impose the will of the corrupt owners of the war machine and the will of the swindlers of the corporate cartels. But would we be able to act for the good of mankind as the founding fathers intended? This is the test facing all of us today. We've lost that moral high ground with the refusal to push for a ceasefire in Ukraine or in Gaza. We lose it every single time we see Biden or Obama or Bush assert the importance of the United States maintaining its control as the head of the rules-based order, when in fact we're violating repeatedly international law. The U.S. has become the largest criminal nation in the world when it comes to this question of defending the international law against intervention in other nations. But that's by intent. And the intent is to use the United States from above, to have the leaders of the corporate cartels use the power of America to impose their world order. And many people who have been opposed to that are being suckered in on this Israel-Gaza fight to once again give their support to this war machine. That's why I say this is the test facing all of us today. I've put a couple of links in the description section which define more clearly or more fully what the options are and what the threat is. But it's really up to you as a citizen, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Europe, or whether you live in the global South, to make sure that your voice is heard over and above the censorship of the mainstream media, the media cartel, and the lies and spin coming out from the hybrid warfare machines of propaganda promotion from the US and NATO. So thanks for joining me. Take this question seriously. There's plenty of works by LaRouche which define this and develop it further that are available to you through the LaRouche Organization website.